Hi, welcome to the next round of meta deck analysis. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about, like I said, actually how the meta has shifted. There is some major swings in actual play rates and everything, so I'm kind of excited about it. If you guys like this kind of content, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe, hit that notification for future videos. We're on our way to 2,000 subs. Make sure you join the Pioneer family, and let's dive into the adjustments. Sadly, there's only one deck to talk about this week. Just because there really hasn't been that many spicy decks. It's been a lot of the similar Rakdos, Prowess, and stuff like that. So let's dive in. So the meta has really shifted. So Rakdos Demons continues to be on the huge decline. It has dropped 6.34%, trending in the past 2 weeks. Rakdos Prowess, I mean, it's only up 1%. Like, so that's minimal, but at the same time, you got to acknowledge, like, that's just one up, one down is usually your up and down rate week to week. But Gruel Prowess, which AKA I believe is a Tarka Red, has gone up to 7% adjusted the last 2 weeks. So it's really on the rise, which is kind of surprising. Like I said, Prowess and those aggro decks are usually vulnerable to demons, but it's still getting kept in check by Green Devotion and Incarnation here in the mid-range slots, which just kind of prey apart on the Rakdos Demons. And you would notice this. Typically, I would think it makes sense that the Nimizet deck is on the dip, even though it's only 1.25% down. It is statistically just kind of bad into Dimir Bounce, which, you vest in your mana into a 5-mana spell, they just kind of bounce it. You kind of got hugely tempoed there. And also, I think 5-color Niv is probably worse into the Prowess decks than something like Devotion, potentially. Because Devotion, I feel like it actually has some game, somewhat. Especially if it gets on the play game 1, even though it is arguably bad into aggro. But at the same time, like, it can shut you down relatively early as well. So, like, it can do some things. It can even kind of get a pseudo-sized board by turn 3. To be able to at least push you off, especially if you can get a turn 2 Cavalier. And most aggro decks aren't really looking, I don't think, to answer an Elf turn 1 necessarily. Of course, they probably will if your turn 1 is a Leyline, Land, Elf, go. They're probably going to answer the Elf. I think Green Devotion makes a lot of sense here. Incarnation's a deck that has a decent amount of removal, just like 5-color Niv. But the difference between Incarnation is, they bounce your Leyline Binding, temporary lockdowns. You'll just recast them, right? They're removal that's better into bounce. So that makes it really good. Plus, this deck also, of course, like Niv, does play stuff like Beans. And I think it does utilize Beans better than Niv. So bounce struggles against that as well. So it does make sense that Incarnation is the deck that's starting to see the uptick out of the actual slow ramp decks. Like I said, I think it's better positioned into something like Bounce, Niv, and Demons. So that makes a lot of sense. And Selesnya is kind of just sticking around about 5%. Hasn't really adjusted. I guess it's 1% less. 1.75% the last 2 weeks. So it's still steady. It's a very upper tier 2 deck. So you're not going to be upset to register that into a tournament. I also wonder maybe if Niv is getting off seeing less play and Dimir Bounce is on the rise, because Dimir Bounce, quote unquote, is kind of the new deck in town. So people might be wanting to try that out. Surprisingly enough, for how everyone was talking about how good Neoform is into Rakdos Demons, it never really took a foothold on the format. So a few weeks ago, I made the comment that I don't know if this deck is going to be in for the long term, because the fact that, for one, it was only really had Oculus as the Wink edition. So I was kind of hesitant to say that it actually could even stand up. Because, if you answer the Oculus, it's kind of dead. And plus, I think also it has to be horrible into Dimir Bounce. They invest exiling 6 cards from their yard, play the Oculus, you bounce it with the double bounce spell, and then they just kind of get out-tempoed. If you sack to Neoform, get your Oculus, they just, again, bounce it. It's not a very good card to actually get bounced. I think other cards are probably better, because the cost from casting from your hand, exiling 6 cards, is actually a cost. So I do think that's something to be noted. But of course, everything else in the mid tier 2, which is Phoenix, Red Deck Wins, Sack, Spirits, everything in this section seems to be on the dip. For the most part, it seems like there's Esper Pixie, but Merfolk. So like it seems like most decks in the mid-range tier, mid-tier 2 are on the dip, and it looks like it's going to be more focused up at the top now. So the meta did shift, right? So that's like like I said previous, I think last week before that, this is the pivotal moment in Pioneer where we officially can potentially determine if Pioneer is truly healthy or not. Like I said, because a truly healthy format, the decks constantly rotate in and out, and there's never a de facto top deck. And it looks like it's, like I said, it's still shifting to where, I mean, technically Rakdos is still the best color combination, but we won't talk about that. We'll talk about the positives of the format, which is Gruul Prowess, darker red, Incarnation, which these two decks have been a pillar of Pioneer. So I'm really excited to see the nostalgia here out of this. These two decks are kind of like the new, I mean, you could quote say they're the new kids on the block. Because Demons, I mean, technically with Annex and also the FOMO, and it's kind of a completely different deck than the old Rakdos, mid-range piles where they had Shieldred, you had your stuff like that. This deck is a little bit different, so it does not necessarily throw back to nostalgia here. And Rakdos Prowess is the quote-unquote fling deck, which has been around for like a little over a year or so. So actually less than a year, because it came around during Bloomburrow. So these two decks, I mean, have been around since like Bloomburrow into Duskmourn. So like these are kind of pseudo new kids on the block, but these three have been around for a long time. Incarnation's probably, you would argue, is a new kid on the block out of the three, but that's still relatively been around since I think Theros or something like that. So yeah, definitely I'm happy to see these nostalgic decks stick around. And then of course Niv is still in here. So like that's like a lot of nice, sweet legacy-ish style decks that have been pillars of the Pioneer format for a while. So I'm glad that the format is still stable, or the format is still stable. But it's kind of sad seeing the other pillar of Pioneer. Is it Phoenix going on the drop? And same with Sack, which have been big pillars of Pioneer for a while. But I'm not really ever been a huge fan of Sack. Sorry. Cat loops. Surprisingly enough, though, I don't really see there's Quintorius combo. Okay, so there is there's Zorius Lotus Field, but there's really no Lotus Field in the past few weeks, looks like. So maybe this is not in a very good position. The Lotus Field matchups, I don't know. But let me know what you guys think about that. Let's dive into the deck list I have and go from there. All right, so this week we technically don't really have a hyper competitive list, but this was a list that got top 32 in the challenge, but it was at the very, very bottom. So this deck, I think, went 1-4, which is a very poor record. But, there's not a lot to find in this round. Sorry about that. Maybe next week or next few weeks, maybe we'll get a lot more because, with the new set and all. But then again, also, I mean, I guess it really depends if you're excited to see Ether Drift. But this deck I thought looked interesting. This could be a deck that, maybe you start changing a little bit, make it a little bit better and your style. But I did like the idea of having Scout with Sigarda's Aid and the Hammer. That seemed like a reasonable approach. Having that hexproof, making it where you could do a Hammer. So I'm not sure if you could do a Naya and focus more in on Hammer time. And you even have like the Ward 2 guy as well. So instead of like Bogles, you could do like a Hammer time Bogle setup where you have your hexproofers and you have your little equipment. I'm not really sure about the Thran Power Suit. This is a card I don't have on Arena, all the copies, and I was gonna try this on stream, but I didn't have the wild cards for the uncommons, and I decided it probably wasn't worth trying to buy some packs to get the uncommons for it. But I do think this deck looks pretty interesting, and it's nice as a concept. Not necessarily maybe you're looking at the list like this deck doesn't look very good, but maybe for the purpose of a concept on developing and fine-tuning a new version of this deck, could very well be a possibility. I like the Lightning Helixes on the board. It's really good against Rakdos Prowess and other Gruul Prowess. Braid's also pretty reasonable there. Also get hit on artifacts. Then you have your Rest in Peace. For more mid-rangey decks, you do have Chain to the Rocks. Strict Proctor, nice way to, I guess, answer Pixie. Bounce decks. Because they typically like to bounce their stuff. But then again, I guess if it's a this town ain't big enough, then it's not going to stop it. But weirdly, Strict Proctor is really bad. Of course, in the Lotus Field, I'm not really sure what diehard matchups. I guess you could do. I don't even know if you wanted it against Niv. You could do it against Incarnations, right? Because Incarnation has all the Overlords and they have ETB triggers. So maybe that's kind of where you want it. You have a Leyline of Sanctity to stop Thoughtseizes. They have another Chain to the Rocks if you need a little bit more target removal for bigger creatures. Now, what I like about that, actually, is the fact that Kellen can find your Chain to the Rocks, which is kind of nice, right? And I don't really know if you want the second copy of Shadow Spear, which is good against aggro. I kind of think how I want to build this thing up is, of course, 4 or 3 hammers, -1 Shadow Spear. Kieran's probably only a 1 of. You kind of want to have it just as a equipable creature. I kind of like the little 1/1 rabbit, potentially. So that way you can get something haste. And then I kind of want to do a little bit more Chain to the Rocks. And maybe dip on some Thran power suits. Or that's kind of what I'm thinking. Let me know in the comment section what you guys think about this list. What upgrades and changes would you guys make? And until next time, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Shout out to all my supporters. And if you want to see any other content from me, check out either one of these 2 videos and playlist. And I'll talk to you soon.